My first independent patrol. I was sure I was doing my job, fighting for order. But when I detained Daryl Washington on trivial charges, everything changed. The video proved me wrong. Now I'm standing on the threshold of the courtroom, knowing that one mistake can ruin not only my life, but the lives of others. My truth is now in court, and I have to answer for what I did. My career in the police started as a clean slate. I have always liked stories about heroes in uniform fighting for justice. I grew up watching such movies and believed that wearing this uniform was a symbol of honor. When I got to the police academy, I was convinced that every step I took, every decision I made, would be right. I studied until late at night, did all my assignments diligently, and eventually graduated with honors. I was taught that the police is not just a profession, but a vocation, that we must protect the weak and fight for justice. So when I received an offer to work at the local police department, I was over the moon. The first patrol is always a special moment for every officer. You get freedom and responsibility at the same time. The first hours on the street are not only a test of your skills, but also an opportunity to show that you are a real police officer. I was ready to prove to everyone that I was not just another newbie in the line. I believed that justice could not be blind, because I was the one who had the right to decide who was guilty and who was not. My partner, Sergeant James, taught me the basics, but I could see in his eyes that he had certain expectations for me from the start. My stubbornness and determination were his best arguments. This is not River City, he often emphasized, trying to show me that our job is not only about following orders, but also about being able to assess the situation correctly. This is a different city. It's more complicated. We have to think, he kept saying. But I was stubborn. I wanted to prove that I could be more than just another policewoman. I had the strength to prove myself right. That day I was alone on patrol. Driving down one of the main streets, I noticed a man outside a store. He was standing alone, in a suit, with a phone in his hand, and he didn't look like a person who could cause problems. But there was something about him that made me wary. I parked the car on the sidewalk and got out. This was my chance to prove myself. "Excuse me, but I have to check your papers," I told him without even waiting for an explanation. He looked up and answered calmly, "I'm waiting for my sister. We are meeting for lunch." His words did not match what I was used to seeing. He was calm, relaxed, and it worried me. It seemed to me that this confidence was nothing more than a hidden arrogance. Something was wrong. Why isn't he worried? Why isn't he panicking? "Give me your papers," I repeated with a rigidity that was greater than any other confidence. I had been raised to believe that such behavior was natural. I was okay, and he had to obey my demands. I didn't even notice how his eyes became intense. I didn't notice that he didn't move quickly, just calmly pulled out his phone to find his ID. He didn't make any aggressive movements, but I had already decided that he was not cooperating. "Hands where I can see them," I ordered him, and quickly approached him. He raised his hands to show that he did not intend to resist, but at that moment I saw only what I wanted to see. I perceived him as a threat, even though he was no different from any other civilian. I took a step forward and grabbed his wrist. That day, street cameras recorded everything. I didn't see how it looked from the outside, but everything changed when the actions I thought were justified were denied by the video evidence. I was sure that it would all be easily justified, that people would understand why I did it. But when the video went to court, I realized that I had become part of the system I was trying to protect. What started out as a simple detention became a turning point for me. I could not have foreseen how these simple actions would lead to serious consequences for me and my career. I was to meet with a judge who would scrutinize everything I had done. Judge Marcus Carter was already gaining a reputation not only for his fairness, but also for turning his back on police corruption. When the Daryl Washington case came to court, I was sure that everything would turn out in my favor. After all, I was acting according to protocol, and his behavior was arrogant and dishonest. That's what I was told in training. We police officers always have the right to defend ourselves, even when others don't understand. I was prepared for the trial, confident in my arrest, and that the video would prove me right. But when I got to the courtroom and saw Derek's face sitting in the dock, something changed. His eyes were not aggressive, but simply full of surprise. He did not look like a criminal. He was not the ordinary person I expected to see after my findings. My confidence suddenly began to melt away. But I tried not to show it. I kept calm because my colleagues were looking at me. There was no video that could compromise me, so I was still in the role of an honest officer. Judge Marcus Carter was a man that everyone in the police force feared. And not because of his harshness, but because of his uncompromising approach to justice. He was not one of those judges who could look the other way when there were obvious violations. Isn't that why every police officer whose name came across his desk repeatedly listed their steps before testifying? I knew that he would not allow any tampering with evidence or lying. At first, the video did not seem very important. It showed Derek standing in the street, without any active aggression. But when they started showing the camera footage, my report began to look less plausible. I said that he made a sudden movement that I perceived as a threat. But this was not on the video. He just took out his wallet to show me his documents. And at the moment when I saw only a threat, the video showed him trying to explain that he was waiting for his sister. This video was supposed to be just proof that I did the right thing, but instead it became my worst nightmare. But what struck me the most was that new witnesses appeared. People who had seen everything I had written in my report were now standing in the witness box and denouncing what I had said. The store owner confirmed that Daryl was a regular customer and was waiting for his sister. The woman from the store said that they met every week. It was part of their family ritual. I began to realize that I had not just made a mistake. I tried to hide my mistake and create a favorable picture for myself. In the report, I described Daryl as aggressive, as someone who had no intention of obeying, and this was an important argument in court. But the truth I began to see was quite different. It was the story of an innocent man whom I had made the target of my prejudice. Judge Carter listened intently. I was filled with fear because I knew that with each new testimony my chances of winning were diminishing. I realized that if he saw something more than a mistake in my behavior, I could end up on trial. Meanwhile, my colleague, Sergeant James, pointed out that this was not what I should have done. His look was full of concern. He clearly understood that the situation had gotten out of hand, and there was no way to undo what I had done. He was one of those who warned me against such hasty decisions, but I didn't listen. I was too stubborn. In the end, after we showed the video and the testimony, Derek was cleared of all charges, and I was left without an explanation. I heard his mother cry when she found out, but it was hard for me to look her in the eye. I could no longer explain to myself why I had believed my version of events without checking the facts. My career seemed lost, but I still couldn't give up the idea that I had done the right thing. But the more I listened to the testimonies, the more I began to realize that it wasn't just me. It was a systemic problem that allowed police officers to distort the facts to manipulate their power. And now I had to not only take responsibility for my mistake, but also do something to change the system. The next few days were a nightmare. I was under constant surveillance. Every word I said and every action I took seemed important to my fate. All my confidence crumbled like sand through my fingers. It was hard to breathe as I stood before Judge Carter, realizing that my words no longer carried weight. I had not only made a mistake, I had made it against a backdrop of systemic injustice. After the video and testimony revealed the truth, I began to realize that I was not alone in this. Gradually, new witnesses began to appear in court, whose lives were destroyed not only by my hands, but also by the system that allowed people like me to commit arbitrariness with impunity. More and more testimonies from those I had once viewed as troublemakers began to reveal how the police had in fact abused their powers. One of the earliest witnesses was Jeremy Torres, a guy I pulled over a few months ago. Of course, I remembered him. He was just standing outside the store, not violating anything. I thought he looked like a typical suspicious character. Now I heard him tell me how, after my arrest, he lost his job and his chances for a normal life forever. He was stuck in a system that I had mindlessly supported, and every cell in my body felt it. It was not just an arrest. It was a blow to my whole life. I missed important moments with my girlfriend. I lost my job. I was in jail, not knowing why, until I found out that I was just chosen as a target for statistics. His words resonated in my soul. And although I couldn't change what I had done, I began to realize that the system that had taught me to see enemies where there were none was part of the problem. Judge Carter listened carefully to each witness. I could feel his eyes penetrating my soul. Every word I said seemed to him to be nothing more than an excuse, because he knew what I was doing. He was ready to listen to me, but his heart was already full of the accusations he had heard. I realized that he himself was a victim of the same system. And the more I listened, the more I felt responsible not only for my mistake, but also for everyone who suffered because of the police, who I once considered my family. My lawyer tried to defend me by finding some reasons why I acted the way I did. He talked about the workload, the difficulty of the job, that I was just studying. But it all sounded like an attempt to hide behind empty words. Nothing could justify my actions, and I knew I would have to pay for every life I destroyed. But it was not only my responsibility that was at the center of this case. Gradually, new facts began to emerge. And these were not just my cases. As it turned out, I was part of a large system that trained us police officers to invent stories and create evidence where none existed. It turned out that these were not isolated incidents, but part of a scheme that many other police officers, even my mentor James, who was one of those who trained me, were covering up. We were all part of something much bigger than just one mistake. At the next court hearing, new evidence was considered, records, documents, testimonies from other cities that confirmed that such cases had occurred in other districts. Every waste of time and money fighting innocent people like Jeremy Torres led to the growth of systemic corruption in the police. This was not just an abuse of power, it was part of the plan. The system allowed young and ambitious police officers like me to start with small mistakes and then slowly move on to more serious crimes, using their power to achieve their own goals. And even when someone started to realize what was happening, it was too late to stop it. This new evidence was more than just evidence for my arrest. They were the key to understanding how the system that covered it all up worked. And now that we were opening up these dark corners, there was no turning back. The time in court began to run out like cold rain. After the testimony destroyed my hopes for acquittal, I could no longer hide my guilt. If only I could turn back the clock. If I could roll back time, stop myself before taking the first step toward Daryl, I would. But I knew that I could never take back those few seconds that determined the fate of a number of people. At the next hearing, the situation became even worse. The prosecutors presented new evidence to show how my action was only part of a larger mechanism that kept people in fear. I had become part of a system that was deeply corrupt, and now we were opening up a whole network of ruthless manipulation, falsification, and attempts to trap people. One of the very first witnesses to appear in court was Jeremy Torres, a guy I detained for allegedly acting suspiciously outside the store. After the video of my false reports became public, Jeremy took to the stand and told how his life had changed since his arrest. He lost his job, his girlfriend left him because she thought he was a criminal, and even when all charges were dropped, the city continued to look at him as guilty. I was in jail for 3 weeks for doing nothing wrong. I was just targeted, and it took away almost everything from me. My family cannot forgive me for being in prison. But nothing can bring back what happened to my life, Jeremy said, and every word he said was like a sharp knife tearing me apart from the inside. I was the one who had caused his suffering, and it could not be forgotten. During that day, the court began to receive new evidence. The prosecutor presented lists of other people who had suffered from the same methods we had been taught. This was not just one mistake or accident. It was a system that created people like me, officers who saw the enemy in every civilian, who didn't question why they were doing it, and who were trained to create an evidence base for their own beliefs. The more I listened to the testimonies, the more it became clear to me that I was not alone in this. I was not chosen by chance. I was part of a plan, part of a big game that someone had organized. Like all the other newcomers, I was inspired by the idea that I was serving justice. But in reality, I was becoming a link in a chain of lies and manipulations that formed a new norm in police circles. The next witness is another man who was a victim of the police. Each of them told their own story. All these cases are similar, like 2 drops of water. Innocent people who were targeted in order to keep the statistics up and ensure order in the city. This was not a case of a single arrest. It was a system that created suspicious faces based on skin color or place of residence. And that's when Judge Marcus Carter came into the picture, a man who became a symbol of the fight for justice, but not for me. He was the one who was able to unravel this tangle of lies and say what I was afraid to hear. The system was corrupt, and I was part of it. Carter has long been known for his uncompromising stance on police misconduct and corruption within the force. Now he sat down on the bench and listened carefully to every word, as if he already knew how it would end. We're not just looking at one case, we're looking at a whole system, he said at the end of the day, his voice hard as a rock. And I intend to show how this system puts its officers in a situation where they are forced to break the law. By the time I began to realize the depth of what I had done, it was too late. I could no longer turn away from the fact that I had become part of a mechanism that was destroying people's lives. I could not escape this burden. The following days became a finale that no one could have predicted. I sat in the courtroom, looking at each witness, and each of them was like a mirror for me. I saw their pain, their frustration, and I realized that this was not just a case about one arrest. It was a story about a system that had cornered us all. All these people I had once perceived as statistics or objects of my work were now real people with real stories. Daryl Washington, whose case became the starting point for this whole process, was sitting in the courtroom, his mother by his side. I no longer saw him as a suspect as I had before. Now he was a victim of my bias, a victim of a system that taught us not to see a person as an individual, but only as a set of elements that had to be evaluated according to the features that were favorable for statistics. I thought about all of this when my lawyers tried to find some way out of my situation. But what could they say? All the evidence was against me. All the witnesses, all the videos, even the testimony of my colleagues who saw me as the perfect future star of the police, now testified against me. I became a symbol of the systemic corruption of which I was an integral part. I, who had been loyal to my service, who was proud of my profession, was now the target of this horrific trial. Judge Carter was precise in his words, and they penetrated deeply into my soul. He spoke not only about police corruption, but also about how the system allows people like me to act without question, and how we officers try to justify our actions based on the knowledge that it is part of our job. It was only years later that I realized that all those hours we spent analyzing situations were not meant to really make us better, but only to make us part of something bigger, part of this corrupt hierarchy. After I had spoken all my explanations, after I had survived my worst criticism, the room became silent. All these people, whom I had once perceived as mere statistics or targets for my work, now became symbols of the true victim of the system. They were not just victims, they became those who came out of this nightmare, who stood up and showed that, despite everything, they had the right to dignity. And so, finally, my moment to respond came. I could not turn back the clock, and I could not pretend that it had not happened. Now I stood in court, and my apology was more than just words for me. It was my path to redemption, not for myself, but for those I had broken. My repentance became part of a process where true justice was an opportunity for restoration, not just punishment. "I'm sorry," I said, looking into the eyes of Daryl's mother, his sister. It was hard because I knew I could never give them back their peace. But it was the only way forward to be part of the change. Judge Carter looked at me, his eyes showing no anger, only sadness and disappointment. He knew that it was not just punishment that could change the situation. He wasn't just judging me. He was judging the whole system that created people like me. And I was part of that reform. "You can make the right choice," he told me, "but it's a long road. And it depends on you how far you are willing to go." All these words resonated with me. I realized that real change starts with each of us. And although I was no longer a police officer, my role in the reform remained. I worked with human rights defenders, conducted trainings for new generations of police officers, showing them how important it is not only to protect people, but also to understand them. I taught them to see people, not statistics. My story was not a story of victory. It was a story of realizing that it is important not only to have power, but also to be able to use it responsibly. And even if it didn't bring me peace, I knew that I had changed my life, my vision of justice, and perhaps the lives of those I could still save from the same fate.